Well, welcome everyone this afternoon to this first webinar. Like last year, we've decided to use the first webinar to take you through the requirements around advanced training. I know a significant proportion of you will have been trainees last year, but obviously there will also be some new trainees. I am going to apologise that a couple of the slides when we go through them might actually be wrong because there was a slight disconnect about getting PowerPoints loaded. But firstly, so for your information, I'm the Chair of the Faculty Training Committee, as Lead Fellow Teaching and Learning, and also on the Faculty Education Committee. Professor Robin Lucas, who will talk about assessment after me, is Chair of the Faculty Education Committee. So between us, we have significant roles, obviously, in your training. So what's going to cover here is a training program overview about learning contracts and learning contract reports. So the first thing, this has actually changed. I haven't got an updated slide, but our new training liaison is Leah Ilud, who is on exactly the same email address as Natasha was and exactly the same phone number as Natasha. She's been in the job now some 3 weeks, and luckily Natasha only sits about 2 seats away from her in the office, so is there to assist her. But she's already been involved with the Faculty Education Committee last week. And the examinations person, I cannot confirm it's the same name. I think the first thing to stress about the advanced training program, and noting it's an advanced training program, is that it's based on adult learning. And because of that, you are actually responsible for your own training when it comes to the crunch. It's certainly you need to take responsibility for all elements and ensuring all paperwork's done and received appropriately, especially now that there are some tighter guidelines by the college of late putting in of documentation with both a late fee or non-acceptance. So, as you're aware, there is a curriculum which is available on the website, and it covers a number of broad areas, or domains is the terminology used when you look at the curriculum document. And that covers general professional practice, cultural competency, information research and evaluation, policy, health promotion, disease prevention, and health sector advocacy, development and management, to name a few. As you're probably also aware, advanced training is 3 years equivalent full-time. And we talk about it as 36 units, where a unit is a full-time equivalent month. And so the content for training is obviously through the advanced training curriculum and the professional qualities curriculum. So that sets the background to what the content of what people should look at, what they should try and cover throughout their training time. For supervision, there is a requirement for every period of training for it to be recognised. It needs to be an accredited position, and you need a supervisor for the training. Generally, the supervisor must be a fellow of the Faculty of Public Health Medicine. However, if it works out, and it does know in numerous situations where your workplace supervisor may not actually be a public health fellow, then what you must have is what we call a co-supervisor, who's a faculty a fellow. And the aim of that is to ensure that as you do the actual works being supervised, there is somebody with an understanding, a fellow of an understanding of the curriculum in more detail to be able to assist in assessing and looking at your learning contract and providing your advice, which might not be within the ability of a non-fellow supervisor. One of the other issues throughout your training, you should have a mentor, or you have to have a mentor, and that mentor also needs to be a fellow of the faculty, unless you can get special dispensation, which in fact Professor Lucas, as Chair of the Faculty Education Committee, does. And your mentor is there to also help guide you through your training and is probably the person who has some continuity during all your training. While you might otherwise change supervisors on a 6-monthly basis or a 12-monthly basis, the mentor is there to be able to provide advice and interact with you on issues. And certainly a mentor is also potentially someone there, say you have a personality clash with a supervisor, is someone totally independent from the workplace who can give you some advice. And if the slide moved, I'll move to the next slide. Okay, we'll just try and work out how to get to the next slide. Go back. No, we've done that one. Can I just have a check that you can still see the slides? Can someone please tell me you can still see the slides? Or not?
Are you there, Chantal?
All right, so continue on. So there are teaching and learning requirements. I apologise for this slide saying 2016, but I said there was an issue of getting the slides updated. But you certainly need per year of training at least one learning contract minimum. There's also a requirement, not a requirement, but it's recommended that people attend the National Training Days. I know some 55 of you are registered as of this morning to attend the National Training Days this weekend. There also will be a number of trainee video conferences every month, one a month, which again are recommended but are not compulsory. Okay, now we'll go to the slide. So just an update around the Masters of Public Health Entry Requirements. So those of you who have either been in the training program the last few years or have commenced this year, there was a requirement to join the program to either have completed an MPH or at least enrolled in MPH and have completed 3 of your 5 core subjects. The one thing I need to stress is for those of you who have not completed your MPH, that you cannot progress beyond 12 units of training until you have completed and provide documentation. We have had a few trainees over the last couple of years where they have not finished their MPH within 12 units and have had to interrupt their training until such stage they've completed their MPH. One thing it is worth remembering is that from next year, any trainee who starts will have to have completed their MPH. So there's certainly 5 core areas we need for the MPH. You can see them listed there: epidemiology, biostats, health protection, health promotion, health policy, planning or management. If somebody has completed an MPH or nearly completed an MPH but has not covered those 5 core subjects, areas, they will need to still complete any gaps in their core areas before progressing beyond 12 units of training, i.e. 1 year full-time training. Covered that. So the training program, the intent of the training program is, while in the workplace, trainees get experience in the practice of public health medicine in a supervised and supported environment. And it's delivered through the workplace, and it might be business as usual work within the workplace, or you might be in a workplace where you actually are doing some particular projects during your training time. The content that you need to look at covering is defined by the learning objectives outlined in the Public Health Medicine Advanced Training Curriculum. one thing it's worth stressing is that during your 3 years full-time equivalent training, it is recommended that you should seek a range of training opportunities, be they formal rotations to other positions or secondments to other positions, but with varied employment, so that you actually get the practical experience dealing with a lot of the competencies and looking at those as part of your training. And certainly it is very difficult to get all the competencies and the learning objectives in a particular job, and in a lot of particular posts. In fact, it might be a very restricted group of the curriculum competencies one can cover. There is the ability to do overseas-based training for up to 12 units, i.e. 1 year full-time equivalent, but this must be pre-approved by the Regional Education Coordinator and the Training Committee. So it's probably, and ipso facto, at least 2 years of the training must be completed in Australia or New Zealand. And also the first year needs to be in Australia. So PhD study may be included. Again, you would need prospective approval, and all standard application assessment procedures apply, including learning contracts, learning contract reports. If someone is doing a PhD overseas, then it would be counted as the 12 months of overseas training. As mentioned before, mentor is there for your whole training program. Must be a FAFM unless there's special dispensation given. They provide oversight of progress. And as mentioned before, they're really an independent guidance on matters relating to training, your well-being and aspects of career development. And in a lot of cases, they're there to probably suggest what other positions might be appropriate within your state or territory, or potentially suggest that you look at your training not necessarily being based in one particular state or territory, so that you can get some of the experience in the other competencies and learning objectives. As mentioned, the supervisor, you need a supervisor for each position, and the supervisor is there to support you in planning, facilitating your learning path during your time when they supervise you, facilitate effective teaching and learning, provide you feedback on your progress, determine your readiness for summative assessments, especially the oral examination, and also oversee completion and sign-off of your learning contract and learning contract reports. Learning contracts. For those who have just started this year, the learning contracts is a method of setting up ahead of time an expectation of, while you're in this particular position, training position you're filling, what competencies or projects or activities you might be doing over the period covered by it, which might be a matter of months, but up to a maximum of 1 year. You only need one per training position. It includes a description of what your role is, what activities and what projects. We are in the process of slightly amending just the terminology on the learning contract, noting that in some positions there might not be specific projects, but there's a lot of business as usual activities that one might be undertaking and will be recorded on your learning contract. The learning contract also includes the intended competencies that you think will be covered. And I'll probably stress that you do need to, under the activities part, give a good explanation of what you're intending to do during that period of time, so that so it's obvious to the supervisor and then the training committee that what competencies you've said you'll cover can be shown by the activities that you said you're doing. So you need to link your activities to the competencies expected to be achieved. But the common problems we've had over the last few years is people cut and paste competency lists without much activity or only write competency numbers, which probably makes it very hard sometimes for supervisors and mentors to actually understand which competencies you're talking about, and also not describing your proposed role in a project. So an understanding what actually you will be doing as a trainee in the position or the activities or the projects, as distinct a generic cut and paste of what the project activity is. So learning contracts do need to be submitted within 4 weeks of commencing a position, and one of the things the college has put out as a reinforcement recently, that if you don't get it in within 4 weeks, then there is a late fee, and if it's not in within, I think it's 2 weeks after that, then in fact it probably will not be accepted, and therefore any period of training prior to the date would actually not be accepted. So once you've finished your period of training covered by the learning contract, then there's a requirement for you to fill in a learning contract report. And that needs to be filled in within 6 weeks and submitted within 6 weeks of completing a position. In these, the trainee obviously is the first to fill it in, then the supervisor will have a look. And as part of it, you're actually detailing the activities and the learning objectives / competencies that you've actually achieved. Noting that when you do your learning contract, it is what you believe you'll do for the period of training covered by it, rather than what then might occur during it. Because in some positions, just because you might be seconded, or you might have, rather than doing a particular project, you've actually moved on to another project or dealt with a disease outbreak or something else. One of the things probably to reiterate is if there is a very significant change in what you're actually doing during the period of a learning contract, then you need to submit a new learning contract to cover that period on for the new activities. Now, for instance, if you actually move position during the time, or if, for instance, you said you were doing one project, that project very early in your time, then for some reason it's not going to occur, then you would need to put another, and if that was the main part of your learning contract, you would need to submit another learning contract to cover the period. So in the end, you're summarising your projects, you make an assessment of the competency level you believe you've achieved against the objectives, and your supervisor will make their assessment as well following that. If they believe that there's a discrepancy between what you believe you've covered and what they believe you've covered, they have to make some notes on the learning contract report to why there's that discrepancy. So, as mentioned, it's a retrospective account of professional roles, activities and projects. Also, you need to probably demonstrate what outputs from projects to show where you have progressed against competencies. As well, you can put training, any training or conferences attended. And there's also a reflection part to the learning contract report for the trainee and the supervisor to fill in. What we've said is that once you've attained a required level of competency for a specific objective, you do not have to repeat on subsequent learning contracts. But the only comment I'll make on that is it's probably worthwhile mentioning them, because if you're only putting on a few that you haven't achieved, for instance, as you get to the latter part of your training, it might look like you're not actually doing much work during the period. So you need to probably also in the activities at least state all the activities you're doing to show that in fact the period of training is actually valid. Well, a bit like saying putting up for a learning contract for 6 months and saying you're only going to cover 2 competencies. I mean, you're obviously going to do a lot more other work than that as part of training, but they won't necessarily pick up new competencies. What we are putting in place is a simple spreadsheet to show for people when they've done the learning contract reports to fill in what the highest level of competency they've achieved. Those who know the current form, which is in the process of being replaced, it really was a very long set of competency numbers with no other information other than for someone to say the competency level. Wasn't a lot of use for a trainee or a supervisor to look at to see what gaps there might be. So the new Excel spreadsheet form actually lists the competencies. It says the highest level you've achieved and when you achieved it, because that can then be used when you're writing your next learning contract to discuss with your supervisor about the competency gaps you might have and haven't covered, to assist in making sure or seeing if it's possible to pick up those competencies in that period of training. As mentioned, if it changes significantly, there are changes, or you must state in the learning contract report what changed, why, and demonstrate what you actually did. If both your learning contracts and learning contract report are signed by both your supervisor and mentor before submission, otherwise they'll not be accepted. And a further reminder that the time limits, college is putting far more onus on ensuring paperwork comes in with the time limits. Those been around for a bit longer in the training program. It has not been as tight, but the college has tightened up its policy, which we must comply with. So reinforcement that learning contracts due within 4 weeks of commencing, learning contract reports are due within 6 weeks of completing, and that data workplace report will be covered a bit later because there's some amendments now in that. And you should note that the workplace reports people do need to have completed 2 satisfactorily, even for sitting the oral exam in 2017. I note there's a couple of questions that have come through, so I'll address those at the end in the questions and answer. Obviously, you're all in the training program, so eligibility to join is not relevant as much. But new trainee, one of the ones that has come in the last 12 months is if training, this is for people you might know interested, become eligible, they need to commence training within 12 months and put in a new eligibility form. Just for background, that really fits in that if someone, say 4 years ago, who said they were eligible to join training when there was a set of criteria at the time, that some of those criteria might have changed significantly over the last 4 years, and therefore we need to review that at the time of commencing training that they're eligible against today's standards or in the last 12 months standards as distinct from previous standards. There are some dates to notify about sitting the oral exam and paying the fee. It's a little early in the year for that, but I suppose those who are looking at sitting the exam need to be well aware of some of these timelines, which are also covered in the handbook. Pass over that. As people are aware, the exam is early November, oral examination early November. There are a number of education policies which is worth looking at if the issues come up for you. There's one on academic honesty and plagiarism, accreditation of training settings. It's really up to a trainee if they go into a position that's not accredited to really speak to the supervisor at the site about getting the position accredited, because until the position does not get accredited, then the training time will not be counted as part of your 36 units. There is a flexible training, noting that the current policy is that from the time you commence training, you have 8 years to complete all training requirements, including the oral exam and all assessments. There is the ability for up to 2 years paternity, maternity leave to be added onto that? Well, I think it's probably just worth just reminding people that at the time of getting your fellowship, you have to satisfy the requirements for the fellowship that are in place at that time. So although you might have, some people might have completed their 3 years or 36 units of training, they might not actually do the oral exam for another year or two, but one of the issues is all of the increased requirements for assessment would be needed to be done to be eligible for fellowship. There's the professional qualities reflection process, there's recognition of prior learning, but notice that is probably only relevant to new trainees because the policy is that needs to be submitted within 6 months of commencing training. And there's a progression through training. You all will have as your reference book the 2017-18 Program Requirements Handbook, and that's got all the requirements. Robin Lucas will be talking about assessment following me, but I might just go through, and I note there are a number of questions, and I'll run through them. So first one here was about changing mentors. There's certainly no issue of changing mentors, just that obviously they will need to be notified the education officer that's occurred, and the new mentor obviously would sign off any further paperwork. Another question, if you pick up from Rachel, if you pick up a new project, can you add on any new competencies into the learning contract report? The answer to that is yes. You just need to document in the learning contract report the actual projects and activities you've done during them, and that would reflect then on which competencies you could claim. Are we required to notify the faculty when we change jobs? Assuming they're okay. You would need to put a new learning contract in for the new position and do a learning contract report for the old position as well, for the ongoing training. Another question, what proportion of competencies do trainees need to have covered during their 36 units in order to complete the training requirements? It isn't a fully competency-based assessment, i.e. completing every single competency. If you do not complete every single competency to the level, it does not preclude you completing the training. But I think it's fair to say those who have not undertaken a significant amount of the competencies are potentially going to have troubles when it comes to some of the other assessments, the oral examination. There's the training, it's probably worth looking at how many competencies you can get, and that's one of the issues why for things like at National Training Days and through some of these webinars, we try and pick up some subjects to provide some education on areas which might be difficult to actually obtain the competencies and which are rarely done. So for instance, this weekend, for those who are attending National Training Days, there's a session on health competencies, which I think is really one of those that very few, it's not necessary that many people probably get a chance to do that in their workplace. So there are other ways of looking at getting competencies. There's certainly would recommend that if people are not getting competencies in day-to-day work, there might be reasons they might want to do a little more study or reading around the competencies to make sure they do have a broad understanding across the competencies as well. I think that's got all the questions I've got at the moment. Does anyone else, are there any other questions at this stage before I hand over to Robin Lucas?
So I can start to talk to you about it while we're waiting for Chantal to get that up. So what we've really tried to do with the assessment program over probably the last 5 or 6 years that I've been involved with assessment is to have it very clearly linked to the curriculum and the competencies that that Tony talked about. We have the system of a combination, the assessment scheme is a combination of formative and summative assessments. And the difference between those two things is that formative assessments are really focused on, all of the assessments are focused on your learning, but the formative assessment is not a sort of a pass-fail type thing. It's an opportunity to, for you to do something and for a discussion with your supervisor to help you learn through that discussion. Whereas a summative assessment is something that you have to pass, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go along. The emphasis in the assessment scheme is on workplace-based assessment. We've tried to de-emphasise the oral exam. It's no longer called the final oral exam. But of course it is still a major pass-fail sort of milestone, in the same way that you have to pass an oral presentation assessment and you have to pass a workplace report. So we've just tried to make it part of that suite of summative assessments. And we always have to, the faculty has to align itself with the developments that are happening within the college. So when the college introduces something like the research projects or the professional qualities assessment, then the faculty has to produce those things as well. Chantal, it's not, can you advance it to the next one and then the next one after that? Yep, so I just talked about that, so the next one. So that's what I was talking about with formative and summative assessment. Formative, it's not something that you need to pass, but it is an opportunity, it's a learning opportunity. It doesn't mean it's optional. The formative assessments are not things that you can do with it if you feel like it. You actually have to do a certain number within the program. You can do as many as you like. You can do heaps more than are required, but you can't do any less than the minimum. So next one, Chantal. So these are the types of assessment we have. We never quite know where to put the learning contract report. It's a sort of a type of formative assessment because you need to do one. It's not sort of formally assessed in any way, but of course it has to be satisfactory. So it sort of sits across between the training, teaching and learning program and the assessment program. We look at written output, we look at workplace reports and the professional qualities reflection, and then there are performance-based forms of assessment, so the oral presentation and the DOPS, and then of course the oral examination at the end of your training. Next one, Chantal. So I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about the DOPS. As Tony said, your program requirements handbook is your Bible of requirements. So if you're ever unsure about what you need to do or what the requirements are, you should be able to find it in the program requirements handbook. And that changes now every 2 years. So you need to make sure that you're actually looking at the current one, not the one from last year, because the training requirements, assessment requirements are changing over time. So the DOPS is a formative assessment. You need to do 3 over the course of your training, and you can do as many as you want. So they're an opportunity to do some of these activities, suggestions that I've listed there. It's an opportunity for your supervisor or another senior person to give you constructive feedback on how you can improve in those things. So it's a tool for you to use as much as it is an assessment requirement. Next one, Chantal. The oral presentation assessment, again, we require 1 formative and 2 summative over the course of the training. Typically, people would do a formative first and then do 2 summative. You don't have to do it in that direction. You can do it in any way you prefer to do them. The formative, again, is do as many as you want. It's just an opportunity to get your supervisor or another fellow to sit down and really listen to what you're saying and provide feedback on your oral presentation technique and content and just the way you communicate with people. So every trainee should do a Jerry Murphy presentation locally. I think we try to get our ACT trainees to do everybody to do one each year. And that's a really great opportunity to do an oral presentation assessment. You can usually get a couple of fellows together to assess it. We do it at our local committee meeting. But we don't allow if you become the person who goes to the Congress to present, we don't allow the final of the Jerry Murphy competition to be used as an oral presentation assessment. And that's mainly because by the time you're giving that assessment, you've had an opportunity to polish it up with feedback and input from a whole lot of other people, a lot of specific training on that specific presentation. And the marking criteria for the Jerry Murphy competition are slightly different to those for the oral presentation assessment, with a lot more focus on content. So if you look at the marking criteria for the oral presentation assessment, it's really about how you communicate, with much less of a focus on content. So by the time you sit by 31st of July of the year you want to sit the exam, you have to have completed one formative and one summative with a pass. But I think people very seldom would submit an oral presentation assessment that they haven't passed, because the opportunity to just keep on going until you actually pass one. So next one, Chantal. Important to note your role and that of your supervisor. So as Tony said, it's adult learning. You need to guide this. You need to organise the occasion. You need to organise the people who are going to assess it. You need to make sure that you are familiar with the marking form so that you frame your presentation appropriately. And it's up to you to have all of that paperwork available for the assessors. Your supervisor's role is to help you with practice presentations, help you identify opportunities, to give you some feedback. And please notice the requirements for appropriate assessors. For the summative assessment, you should have 2 fellows of the faculty, and they can't be your supervisor. For the formative, it's less rigid. It's good to have 2 fellows, but it's not essential. And you can, if you're really struggling to find somebody, you can use your supervisor. But it's best to get people who are separated from you so that they can give you really independent feedback on your presentation. Next one, Chantal. Workplace reports. As Tony noted in his presentation, that we've now gone to 3 workplace report submission rounds. So there was one in early March, there's another in June, and there's another in September. For trainees who want to sit the oral exam, you have to have passed 2 by the 31st of July in the year that you want to sit the exam. Because of the time it takes to get reports in, get them out to assessors, get the marks in, send them out to another assessor if there's a query about if there's one person says pass and one person says fail, one assessor says pass and one fail. We can't guarantee that if you submit your workplace report in the June round that you will have a result by the 31st of July. So not much point telling you that now, I suppose, but for next year, if you want to sit the exam and you need to have a workplace report passed by 31st of July, you need to focus on getting it in that first submission round. Now we are in the process, we're right in the process actually of revising the guidelines, not to change anything, but to make them clearer. I don't know whether people know Judy Stratton. Judy used to be the chair of the assessment subcommittee and was heavily involved in introducing the workplace reports. And what she's now offering is that if you want to submit a workplace report and you're not quite sure whether it will be suitable, you will be able to send the abstract or a description of that workplace report to the Natasha or Leah, and that will be passed on to Judy to have a look at, and she will give you feedback on whether she thinks that will be an appropriate thing to submit for a workplace report. So we don't want everybody to do it because then it becomes really, really onerous. But if you and your supervisor just can't decide whether something will be suitable, that will be an opportunity to check that out with Judy before you actually submit it. So you have to pass 3 workplace reports over the period of your training, and we sort of, that's around 1 a year. For trainees who started in 2017, one of those workplace reports has to satisfy the college's requirements of a research project. So you may need to look those up on the web to see what those requirements are. They're very similar to our workplace report requirements. The marking is very similar. So I think it'll make very little difference to us. You can see there the types of things that are suggested. Trainee, you've got to be, it's actually, I think that sole author's changed. You have to be first author of 1 report. You must have 1 report that's quantitative data analysis, and no more than 1 report can be in the form of a published paper. But those guidelines will be, Judy's just done them in the last couple of days, so fresh guidelines will be up on the website as soon as they've gone through all of the appropriate committees. But there's no big changes, it's just clarification. Next one, Chantal. Again, the role of the trainee and the role of the supervisor, you can see there. It's up to you to talk to your supervisor to make sure that what you're submitting is suitable in content and quality. It's really up to you to look at the workplace report marking guideline. If you submit something that can't be marked against that marking guideline, then you are at risk of not receiving a pass grade on that. So do have a look at that marking guide. Do get your supervisor involved in giving you some feedback on what you're planning to submit, both in content and in quality. And the supervisor has to verify your role on the project and that it's of appropriate content and quality. But do engage them nice and early so they've got time to really give you decent feedback. Next one, Chantal. So the oral exam, as we talked about, was a summative assessment. It's at or near the training, happens once a year in November. The format is that you get 45 minutes, you get given the questions and you have 45 minutes of reading and preparation time. The exam itself goes for 1 hour, so you have 30 minutes with each of 2 separate panels with a 10 to 15 minute break in between those, just to gather your thoughts again. The exam covers anything that is in the curriculum may be included in the exam. So the 8 questions, clearly we can't cover the whole curriculum. Everybody will always get a plain language question, an Indigenous health question and an epidemiology question, and all of the other questions are just drawn from some part of the training curriculum. As Tony said, you're allowed 3 attempts and you have to pass the exam within the maximum training time. Next one, Chantal. We talked a little bit, covered some of this eligibility, and it's in the program requirements handbook. Your learning contracts and learning contract reports have to be up to date. You have to have medical registration, the same as to enter the training program. You need at least 29 units of training by the 1st of December of the year of the oral examination, and by the 31st of July in the year of the examination. You must have completed 2 DOPs, formative, 1 professional qualities reflection, 1 formative oral presentation assessment, and 1 summative, obviously with a pass. And you must have passed 2 workplace reports, and you have to have paid the examination fee. And you have to be up to date with college training fees, otherwise you won't be allowed to sit. Next one, Chantal. So I just thought it'd be useful for you to see how we mark in the exam. So you have to get 60% or 6 out of 10 to pass as an overall average score. So there are 3 examiners marking every question. If 2 examiners give a score of 4 or less on the question, it's a fail. If you get an average score of 4 on any question, it's a fail on that question. So if somebody gives you a 3 and somebody gives you a 5, obviously it depends what the third person gives you, but so 4 is a fail. If you fail more than 2 questions, you fail the exam. And the final result we give is a pass-fail. So even though we mark out of 10, if the question is out of 10 and the averages are out of 10, we don't feed back the marks at all. All that goes back to you is a pass or a fail. The outcomes are available 2 weeks after the oral exam is finished. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of checking and double checking, and the lead examiner writing up reports for people who didn't pass. And so there's quite a lot of work that happens to make sure that the result that you get at the end of 2 weeks is actually the correct result. For the last couple of years, we have been offering a supplementary exam, and this is where candidates receive an overall borderline, so an average across all of the questions between 5.8 and 6, or just less than 6. And what happens there is that when all of the candidates have finished, we tell people that they are or are not being offered a supplementary exam. So you don't learn about pass or fail there, you just learn whether or not you're being offered a supplementary exam. And those people who are offered a supplementary exam are invited to get another 8 questions, and they go through exactly the same process. So 45 minutes of reading time, and then examined by 2 panels of 3 examiners, 4 questions each. And the idea is that we're just gaining more information. So it's not, you don't sort of fail one exam and pass the other, but we have 16 questions to assess you over rather than the 8 of the original exam. So it's gaining more information. And that'll be offered again in 2017. I don't know the exact format yet. We haven't discussed yet how you will be told that supplementary, whether you'll be told it face-to-face or given an envelope. That'll be something for discussion as we develop the exam processes a little bit further. Next one, Chantal. Then the professional qualities reflection. You need to do 2 over the course of training. That'll increase to 3 in 2019 when the next handbook comes out. It's compulsory. I don't need to read through the roles of the trainee and the role of the supervisor, but reflection is learning how to reflect on something and have the opportunity to discuss it with your supervisor and develop a plan of how to improve management perhaps of a particular situation is really incredibly useful part of training. And it's something that once you are a fellow, it's part of your continuing professional development, is reflecting on your professional development and incidents within your work to develop those skills further. Next one, Chantal. So that's the summary for 2017, 3 workplace reports, or 2 workplace reports and a research project, 2 summative oral presentations over the course of training, a successful final oral exam, and then the formative assessments that you can see. And I think that's all. Next one, Chantal. Yes. Any questions for either of us? So eventually we want to get to 3 PQRs. So, so that essentially there is one for every year of training in the same way there's one for every year of training for DOPS, one for every year of training in the workplace report. The college typically requires that when a new assessment is introduced or when new requirements are introduced, they apply to all trainees in the training program at that time. So eventually we want to get to 3 PQRs, and the same thing happens with DOPS. But if we say 3 PQRs now, it means that everybody, every trainee right now has to do 3 PQRs before the end of training, even if you're in your last year of training. So to avoid that, we've been bringing them in slowly like this, so that first of all there was a requirement for 1 PQR, then for 2 PQR, and there would have been 3 PQR from 2018, except that now we're required to do a handbook every second year, so you're off the hook until 2019. So it's just the way the college requirements are, and we're trying to avoid overloading people who are in their last year or their last couple of years of training with a sudden requirement for a whole lot of new things. So it looks like we're changing the requirements every year, but actually we're just trying to ease things in and make it a little bit easier for trainees.
Well, it's also fair to say that this was taken into account by the college with the introduction of the research project, but that only applied to those who commenced this year in training. So those who prior to that didn't have to have a research project is defined by that as one of their workplace reports. So it will vary between the different assessments to whether it's broad, how it's brought in, and any other requirements.
Yes, so I was on the research project group that talked about when to bring that in, and that normally would have been brought in just when it came in 2017. Everybody would be required to have 1 research project before the end of training, and we recognised that that wasn't going to be fair, so we sort of organised with the college that we would be able to bring it in this way. It is the only piece of assessment that's been allowed to just bring in according to year of starting. So that's not usually how they do it. Any advice for a trainee just starting? Get stuck into all of these bits of assessment. Get a workplace report. Be thinking about what you can use for a workplace report, and aim to have one in each year, so that you're not getting to the year of the exam and then suddenly having to do a whole lot of oral presentation assessments and a whole lot of workplace reports and so forth. Do as many formative DOPS and PQRs and oral presentations as you can, because they get your supervisor or other fellows to actually sit down and concentrate on how to develop those skills of yours.
So one just in, you certainly need to a learning contract report at the end of each learning contract period. You might be in one training position, you might over a period of a year do potentially 2 learning contracts rather than 1. The projects that you put in your learning contract report could be written up as workplace reports. There's nothing saying that they can't be the same. So I think, and you could do 2 workplace reports at 1 training site, but they've obviously got to be different reports. You wouldn't do 2 disease outbreak reports if you're working in a clinical disease unit. They have to be different on their subjects.
And the same goes for something like a PhD. You can do 2 workplace reports from 1 PhD if you want, but they have to be very different. So perhaps you might have a quantitative analysis and a qualitative analysis, or you might, think about the ethics application and present the results differently. They have to be quite distinct things to qualify as separate workplace reports. Any others?
So for recognition of prior learning, one of the policies is that you have to do your assessments, have to be done during your training period. So you cannot get recognition of prior learning for formative or summative assessments. What it probably does mean that, in fact, if you say get a year up to 12 months of recognition of prior learning, you would only have 2 years to do all your assessments in, plus any other time before you can complete. To some extent, it's one of the risks of recognition of prior learning and getting 12 months, but the assessments remain the same whether you have a period of prior learning or not. You still have to do all the same summative and formative assessments.